The sun beat down on him, dirt and dust swirling in a hot wind that rose out of the desert. Aaron breathes deep, holding his rifle at the ready, the sounds of gunfire filling the air around him. Close by, he hears the sounds of yelling, explosions, death. He kicks open the door, his squad at his back. The explosions still echoing in his ears as he suddenly shoots up in the dark, gasping for breath. He moves into his bed, untangling the thin sheets that cling to his sweat-drenched body, clutching his head in his hands. He tries to catch his breath as he sits on the edge of his bed, the nightstand beginning to buzz in the dark, and he glances to see his phone lit up. Reaching forward, he taps the answer call button and brings it to his ear. "Aaron, oh, thank God. I'm sorry that I woke you," his mother says to him, whispering as if it would help him stay asleep in the darkness of the night. "Mom, it's..." He begins glancing at his phone to check the time. 2 a.m, what are you doing? He asks, but he already knows the answer. His mother hasn't slept well since his father passed away a year ago. He hears her sigh at the other end of the line. "Oh, you know me," she begins, and she pauses for a moment, and he knows that she's thinking about him. He does the same. Images of his father flashing through his mind, but he only frowns as this brings up long-held feelings of guilt. "It's not that important right now, but it's about Candace," she tells him, and Aaron stands letting the damp sheets fall off his body as he moves through his small apartment. "What about her? I thought she was still traveling," he says as he flicks on the light to the bathroom. He puts the phone on speaker and sets it back down on the toilet, beginning to splash cool water on his face. I don't know. She hasn't responded to any of my calls or texts in the last few days," his mother tells him, and he pats his face dry on a nearby towel, picking the phone back up. "Oh, that's not all that surprising. She was gonna go find herself," he said sarcastically, still not agreeing with his sister's decision to abandon their mother the way that she did. "Don't make fun. You know she took it hard when your father passed. She's lost right now, emotionally speaking," his mother tells him, irritation edging into her voice. "But despite all of this, she still texts and calls me every day to let me know that she is safe." Aaron sits back down at the edge of the bed, sighing in frustration. "Mom, it's been 3 months. Maybe she just got bored, or drunk, or maybe she met some guy." He begins to wonder if he'll be getting back to sleep that night, knowing that it wouldn't matter anyway. No, she was on her way back home. She told me that she was stopping in one last place, some tourist town called Silverton. It's not even that far from here, she says, and Aaron sighs again as he figures out why his mother is really calling. "You want me to go check on her, huh?" The question not really being a question, and she quickly begins to explain the request. "I'd do it myself, but I have to work this weekend, and since you've still got some downtime, I thought you wouldn't mind." He begins to nod his head in response, and he's also aware that she can't see him on the phone. Fine, I'll do it, but you're paying for the hotel and gas." He can almost hear her relieved smile in her voice. "Oh, thank God. I just feel like there's something wrong. You're such a good son," she tells him before they hang up. "No, I'm not," he whispers quietly in the dark. He didn't waste any time quickly powering up his old laptop and checking for information on this town called Silverton. He frowns as he looks at the town's touristy website. Why would she go there? He whispers quietly to himself as he scrolls through the mining town's information. His frown deepens as he reads about the healing mist that clings to the very air of Silverton and how people come to find their silver lining. A few more clicks leads him to an ad for the old Church of Silverton, where people go to seek salvation in these dark times. Who comes up with this stuff? He says as he rubs his eyes, glancing at the clock, shocked to see that it shows 4 a.m. So he shuts the laptop and puts it to the side, trying to sink once more into the bed that is too soft for his back. He awakens again at 6 a.m. and goes about his normal routine, push-ups, sit-ups to get his body going, followed by a breakfast of bacon, eggs, and toast. He washes it down with a beer, and by 8 he's packing a bag and heading out the door. He swings by his mother's house, aware that she's already left for work, but he lets himself in. He moves through the small ranch quickly, ignoring the photos of their family that line the hallway. He stops briefly for a moment in his sister's room, sighing as he stands at the center and looks around, not really sure what he's even looking for. Maybe an answer to what she's doing, save himself a trip. But nothing leaps out at him. and the idea of going through his college sister's things sends chills down his spine. He quickly turns and moves back out, heading for the hall closet. He doesn't have to look hard, as he knows exactly where his father kept his old footlocker. He drags the wooden box out and sighs as he looks down at it. His father's name and rank stenciled along the top in faded yellow letters. He hadn't been out of the service for very long, but he still felt naked when he wasn't armed. Several deployments in violent war zones would do that to you. So he opens his father's footlocker, trying desperately to ignore the old photos of his father during his time in the service. He moves aside several mementos until he finds what he's looking for. The old .45 that was actually his grandfather's, gifted to his father the day he got out. Aaron turns it over in his hands, admiring the condition, considering how old it actually was. He thumbs the magazine release, quickly checking to make sure the weapon is loaded. He nods and chambers around, tucking it into his belt before putting the footlocker away and heading back towards the car. His mother was technically right, though what could be considered not that far was entirely dependent upon the person themselves. Silverton was a 9-hour drive away, depending on traffic. He made good time, only stopping once for food and gas. He pointed his old truck down the main street of Silverton around 6 at night, driving slowly, though it didn't matter much since they were apparently in the off-season anyway. The main street was designed to look like a turn-of-the-century mining town, though most of the brightly decorated windows showed a more modern aesthetic. The main street itself was relatively quiet at this time, which meant most of the businesses probably shut down after 6 this time of year. A few people were walking down the sidewalk, but nothing that would point this to being a booming tourist town. Aaron turned right at the end of the street, heading towards the hotel that his GPS said was the only one in town. There wasn't even much chance for searching for Candace at this point, so the most obvious place to start would be the Gem Hotel. Turning onto another side street, he drove past what looked like the only gas station technically in this touristy part of town. And just ahead, rising up on a small hill, was the Gem Hotel. It didn't look like much, and was probably quite nice back in the 70s, which he guessed was the last time that it was updated. He pulled into the parking lot with only a handful of cars and began to head towards the main building. Walking inside the main lobby, he marvels at how one point the ornate interior was probably quite nice, but now it just seemed out of touch with the modern sensibility. Everything was decorated in dark woods, with old-fashioned sconces casting light over a carpet that looked straight out of The Shining. The motel even came with an old-fashioned bellhop, a freckle-faced kid who couldn't be older than 17, dressed in a vintage style to match the town's old-world aesthetic. "Evening, sir," the kid said with a tip of his hat and a broad smile. Aaron just nodded a greeting at him, stopping at the front desk, and he glanced around. There was no clerk to be seen, just a simple bell sitting on the counter. He glanced back, nodding once again at the smiling bellhop. He reached out his hand, gently touching down on the bell, sending out a clear ring through the vast lobby. From the back, another smiling gentleman, his hair slicked back and his eyes staring out from behind wired-framed glasses, appeared. "Evening, sir. What can I do for you?" he asks, almost snapping to attention behind the large desk. Aaron cleared his throat for a moment. I'd like a room for the night, please." The man nods, reaching for the large leather-bound book. "Well, lucky for you, we're not that busy this time of the year. Got a few openings right here," he says, flipping through the tome. Aaron just stares at it, shocked that the hotel doesn't have a modern computer system. "How does room 8 sound?" the clerk asks. Aaron agrees and money is exchanged, with the clerk bringing a credit card machine out of a mysterious spot from behind the counter. Before he leaves, Aaron reaches into his coat pocket and brings out a picture of his sister. "You wouldn't happen to have seen this girl staying here, would you? Or maybe you've seen her around town." The clerk stares at the picture for a moment before his smile returns. "While we don't usually disclose our guests, I will admit I have not seen this young lady." "Long-lost love?" the clerk asks, his eyebrows raising inquisitively. Aaron smiles and shakes his head. "Nothing like that, just a wayward sibling." Retrieving his bag from his car, he quickly walks through the quiet hotel. It was actually quite huge, acting as more of a tourist attraction than a bustling place people would actually stay, with Aaron figuring that most people actually stayed outside of the town and merely drove in. His room itself was nothing special, with a simple queen-sized bed, desk and chair, and a more modern-looking flat-screen television bolted to the wall. After dropping his bag, he stared around at the meager surroundings. A quick check of the bathroom didn't uncover some hidden luxury either. While he felt that he should start looking for Candace, the entirety of the day's drive hit him at once and he felt his body simply sag. "I'll start in the morning," he whispered to himself before stripping down, climbing into the much too lumpy bed, and he quickly fell asleep. In his dream, the sun beat down on him, dirt and dust swirling in a hot wind that rose out of the desert. Aaron breathed deep, holding his rifle at the ready, the sounds of gunfire filling the air around him. Close by, he hears the sound of yelling, explosions, and death. He kicks open a door, his squad at his back, and he pushes through the small entryway of the house, moving into the courtyard with purpose. He trusts that his squad mates have his back. A dark shape moving into the doorway in front of him, explosions echoing close by. He raises his weapon, and a short scream escapes his lips as he bolts upright in the dark, pivoting back and forth quickly as he stares at the unfamiliar surroundings. But the day's events come back to him quickly and calmly. And, trying to control his breathing, he glances over at the clock, staring at the red numbers that tell him that it's 1 a.m. He rubs his eyes, cursing himself gently in the dark, and he finally stands, pushing off the hotel's scratchy blanket. He moves towards the bathroom, pushing open the door, hitting the light. A boy stares back at him. He can't be more than 10 years old. His eyes are wide as he looks at Aaron with fear. Blood has already begun to soak through his long shirt and loose trousers. It begins to puddle on the floor beneath his bare feet. Aaron screams as he jumps back, bouncing hard against the wall behind him. He slides to the floor, another yell of panic ripping out of his mouth. His eyes shut tight, but when he opens them again, the boy is gone. There's no blood on the floor, merely the outdated bathroom of an outdated hotel. He catches his breath, allowing the terror that seized his chest to dissipate before he stands. Cautiously, he steps into the bathroom, quickly checking behind the door and the shower curtain. But there's no monster hiding around the corner, no ghost haunting him. He sighs again, staring up at the ceiling. "Get a hold of yourself," he whispers. He quickly relieves himself, heading back to bed. But after an uncomfortable 20 minutes, he realizes that he's tossing and turning once more, and he realizes that sleep will elude him for the rest of the night. So he quickly gets dressed, pulling on his jacket, and he stares at his duffel bag, questioning whether he should take the old pistol with him. But the moment passes, and he shakes his head. The hotel itself is deathly quiet as he moves through it, stopping in the darkened dining room, deciding to take a side entrance to avoid having to make small talk with the clerk and the bellhop. Outside, it's a cool fall evening, bordering on the verge of being too cold. At this hour, the town is dark, though Aaron can see the glow of the gas station in the distance. He decides against taking his car, thinking that the walk might do good to clear his head. The walk doesn't take long, and he can see the station only has 2 pumps. A large sign over them declares that they have gas for less. He walks by the pumps, looking at the windows, which have other local slogans on them. Ban pre-shredded cheese. Make America great again. 3 tacos for the price of 2. Hospital employees get half off. Senior service is satisfied. Tobacco at its best. Try our new ultimate bacon explosion. For a brief moment, Aaron thinks that the kid in the bacon poster is the same from the bathroom. But when he looks again, the happy-looking child looks nothing like the horror that he saw. The bell over the door jingles as Aaron steps inside, greeted by the light night rock music gently playing over the radio somewhere behind the counter. The convenience store isn't anything special. The same layout as thousands of others that crisscross America. In the far corner, Aaron sees a rack of hot dogs and taquitos, with a large sign overhead offering that ultimate bacon explosion. "Evening," the man says from behind the counter. Aaron only glances at him, but the man seems unremarkable as Aaron holds a greeting. He moves through the aisles, grabbing a bag of chips, a candy bar, and a soda. Nothing like a little healthy eating during the early morning hours. He walks up to the counter, reading the man's name tag, really taking a good look at him. Jerry was kind of an odd-looking guy, tall and thin as a reed. His hair fell on his shoulders in fuzzy waves. He looked at Aaron through large, thick glasses, the kind that make your eyes look even bigger. The workings of a beard covered his face, and judging by the patchiness of it was probably the best that he could do. "How's it going?" Aaron grunts at him, and Jerry breaks into a broad smile. "You know, living the dream," he says with a wink. Aaron stares at him for a moment, gifting the man a slight grin. "Not too busy tonight?" "Even if it wasn't so late, this is the off-season. Not a lot of customers at this time. Just the locals." Of course, the old whiskey bar is closing up soon, so we'll get a couple of drunks in here. Plus, the fall festivals are in a few weeks, so it'll begin to pick back up, he says as he accepts Aaron's money. Aaron doesn't reply, already receiving more information than he wanted from a simple question. But he got a feeling that Jerry liked to talk. Probably didn't get too much going on in the late night shift. So reaching into his pocket, Aaron pulls out a picture of his sister. Have you seen this girl around in the last couple of days? She was supposed to be passing through, he asks, and Jerry stares at the picture. A little too hard for Aaron's opinion. But finally he shakes his head. No, I can't say that I have, but I usually work the late shift. So unless she's coming through in the middle of the night, I wouldn't have seen her. His eyes following the photo as Aaron puts it back into his pocket. Worth a shot. Aaron grunts at him, and he picks up his items, heading back out the door, quietly ignoring whatever farewells Jerry might have thrown at him. He walked back over to the hotel, taking in the quiet of the night. Returning to his room, Aaron opened his late-night snacks and put them on the TV, aware that sleep wouldn't be returning to him that night. The next day passed relatively uneventfully. He walked around the small town, taking in the sights and showing various store employees of the town Candace's picture. Several people thought that she looked familiar from a few days ago, but no one could tell him where she went, or if they were even sure that they had actually seen her. He ate his lunch at Flo's diner, taking in the old world feel and staring up at the town's history that Flo displayed in picture frames all over her wall. The town quietly began to close up as the night fell once more, and Aaron was forced to return to the gem, with no real headway having been made. It was another night of fitful sleep, with the full darkness of sleep being just on the edge of his grasp. He finally sighed heavily, struggling out of bed, pushing aside the scratchy blanket and worn sheets. Getting dressed, he once again headed out of the hotel into the cool night. Yet this time he avoided the gas station. He didn't wish to have to deal with the overly talkative Jerry. He walked down the dark streets, only realizing that he was heading to the whiskey saloon as he neared it. The place seemed relatively alive from the street, with most of the locals probably spending their nights here on the weekend. It was a brisk Saturday, and he could hear the sound of country music coming from the jukebox. It was wafting out of the thin walls. A few customers leaned against the wall on the outside, taking in the fall air through their cigarettes. Aaron hadn't smoked since he got out of the military, and he quietly walked past them, taking in the familiar aroma of the smoke. Inside of the saloon, it wasn't overly packed, and Aaron was able to walk around the circular room to the bar. Like most of the buildings in Silverton, the whiskey saloon was draped in the old world charm, designed to look slightly like what a saloon would have looked like when Silverton was at its peak mining phase. However, someone had made the wise decision of updating the interior at some point. The overhead lighting shifted in sync with the country music that blared out of several large speakers that had been installed into the rafters. A circular dance floor took up the center of the room, surrounded on all sides by the simple tables and chairs. The bar took up much of the back wall, with several counters and stools for the patrons to sit on. Aaron took a seat and didn't have to wait long before the bartender got to him. He showed him Candace's photo. The man shook his head. Aaron nodded. This was becoming the usual routine, so he ordered one of the local beers and settled into his seat. Aaron doesn't drink much these days, as the booze usually brought up old memories, but it didn't matter at this moment. He sighed. He wasn't really sure what he needed to do next. It already seemed like he had asked everyone in town that might have seen Candace, and that was only if she had done any shopping and hadn't merely driven straight through town. Some people thought maybe they had seen her, but it could have been any number of tourists that were passing through. The truth was that people here saw so many random people in their lives, it would be hard to remember someone in passing. He pulled out his phone, texting his mother that he wasn't having any real luck and would probably return tomorrow. He then sighed over his third beer. Third beer. He thought about that quizzically. He didn't even remember finishing his first or ordering a second. He glanced at his phone again and he realized that he had been here for over an hour, 30 minutes since he had texted his mother. He shook his head, not thinking that he actually felt drunk. He threw down some money for the beers and pushed away from the bar, deciding that maybe he should try to get some sleep after all. He waved at the bartender, who offered him a nod, and he headed towards the door. He passed a few other patrons in the bar, not really bothering to look at them. As he reached the front door, he pushed it open and stepped out into the world. The sun beat down upon him, dirt and dust swirling in the hot wind that rose from the desert. Aaron breathed deep, holding his rifle at the ready. "Eyes up, everyone. Keep a sharp lookout," his squad leader called. They were heading down a small road at the edge of town in Afghanistan. To Aaron's left are several of the mud-colored buildings and the walls that surround the courtyards, while on his right is a drainage system and a 6-foot wall that surrounds several of the town's grape fields. Aaron is out front, his rifle at the ready as he leads the rest of his squad. In front of them are the 1st and 2nd squad, moving along a staggered line for their presence patrol. Suddenly, an explosion echoes up ahead, and the area is filled with the sound of gunfire. Aaron hits a knee, immediately swiveling his head to make sure that no one is going to shoot at them from the rooftops to his left. His squad leader rushes forward, and they both duck as another explosion sounds from the grape field to their right. Up ahead, they can see the 1st and 2nd squad pushing forward down the road, bullets ricocheting off the walls around them. "We have to get out of here! There's nowhere for us to go if they circle around!" someone shouts out from behind them. Aaron looks at his squad leader for orders, and the man glances around quickly. He finally motions to the door at the courtyard nearby. "We go through here. Make sure there isn't a way for them to sneak around on us or try and take out the guys ambushing us." He shouts over the gunfire and explosions, and Aaron nods as the sergeant taps him on the shoulder, and he heads to the door. The soldiers all stack up, preparing to enter and clear. The doorman rushes in, knocking the door inward, allowing Aaron to rush forward. He turns the corner in the dark overhang, sure that his teammates would cover his rear, and he checks the corners as he moves forward. He keeps moving, heading towards the opening into the courtyard that will lead him back into the sunlight, when another explosion thunders nearby, the sound amplified in the small space. Suddenly, a shadow appears in the doorway ahead of him. It's holding something. Aaron raises his weapon and clicks off the safety, his finger tightening on the trigger. He stumbles off the curb, hitting hard on the pavement, and he holds out his hands, taking a sharp intake of breath as he feels the sting of his scraped flesh. A light suddenly shines in his face, and he holds up his skinned hands to block it. "Son, you all right?" the local cop asks him. Aaron doesn't answer right away, turning his head in confusion. He doesn't know where he is. He doesn't know how he got here from the bar. Few questions lead the cop to believe that he's a drunk. Aaron doesn't try to argue and allows the officer to take him back to the hotel. Luckily, he could at least seem coherent, and he hasn't brought up the drunk tank. The officer makes sure that he makes it up to his room, and he quietly strips down, crawling back into the bed. Aaron doesn't sleep long, though, as he hears movement in his room. He doesn't open his eyes. His hands twitch as they realize the pistol is still in his duffel across the room. He finally opens them up and immediately recoils in fear, panic gripping his heart as he stares up at the face of his father. But this isn't the man that he remembers. His father was always full of life, quick with a joke and a small smile always on his face. This man was haggard, his face, his eyes gaunt as he peered down at Aaron. It was a sudden heart attack that had taken him. It happened quickly at work, and they said he was going to the hospital. None of them had gotten to say their goodbyes. Aaron hadn't even spoken to him in a month. The demands of his deployment took him away from anywhere that he could have reached out to his family. He hadn't learned until the week after had it even happened. The ghostly shell of his father reached out for him, and Aaron yelled in panic and rolled away, uselessly tossing a pillow at the specter. He kept moving, rounding the bed quickly, his eyes trying to not look at the monster. He practically leaped across the room, rolling for his duffel bag and the safety of the weapon hidden within it. He came up with a two-handed grip, aiming the weapon. But his father was gone, disappeared as if he had never even been there. Aaron fell backwards, his butt hitting the floor hard as he scooted back against the wall, the pistol still tightly in his hand, and he moved it back and forth across the small room. The panic wouldn't leave his chest, his heart still feeling like a vice held it fast. The morning's light peeked through the windows before he finally lowered the weapon. His arms were sore from strain, but he refused to close his eyes and relax. The sun had finally risen, and Aaron pulled himself up from the floor, lowering his pistol. Morning light flooding the room as he quickly began to pack his things. For a moment, he stares down the pistol that he still clutches in his hand. He decides against putting it away, instead tucking it into his belt at the small of his back. A terrible way to carry a loaded pistol, but he didn't want to let the fact that he didn't have a holster impede him from protecting himself. It didn't take him long to check out of the hotel and throw his bag into the trunk of his car. He got behind the wheel and sat for a minute in the soft sunshine, beginning to feel slightly better. "All right, get a hold of yourself, you're fine," It was a bad dream, he whispers, his hand fumbling for the key. He quickly brings the car to life and pulls out of the parking lot. Gotta get out of here. Candace probably went home anyway. Doesn't seem like she even stayed here. If anything, she just passed through. He began to point his car out of town. But as he drove, he passed a small wooden church that set up on the hill. He never considered himself a religious person, but the images of the church on Silverton's website flashed through his mind. Seeking salvation in these dark times. He never thought to check the church, though it was the kind of spiritual mumbo-jumbo that Candace had been spouting before she left home. His hands seemed to move on their own as he turned the wheel and pulled into the dirt parking lot. There were no cars yet, and a sign next to the front door proclaimed that services started at 11 on Sundays, which gave him a few hours before the true believers showed up. Stepping out of the car, he walked towards the door of the single-story church, his boots crunching on the dirt beneath his feet as he got closer and closer. As if on cue, the door swung open and he reached the 3 steps that led upward. Standing before him was a man in a suit and a tie. His dark hair and beard had already started to go gray, but his eyes seemed to be strong. "Good morning, friend. Can I help you?" Aaron started to open his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He meant to ask about Candace, show the pastor her picture, but his hands hung loosely at his side. The pastor looked at him for a moment, perhaps sensing that something was wrong. Finally, he reached out a hand, not actually touching Aaron, but showing that he was here. "Are you okay, son?" he asks, his voice soft. Emotions clutched at Aaron's chest and he started to gasp for air. The pastor waves his hand, motioning for Aaron to come inside. The church itself was no larger than what it looked like from the outside. It was really just a one big room kind of thing, lined with pews that all faced the pulpit at the front. The standard images of religious figures could be found on the walls, most likely purchased from a local Christian bookstore. An electric organ took up a corner near the front. The pastor set Aaron down on one of the pews and stood nearby. "Something's troubling you, son. I can see it and I know you can feel it. This is a place of healing, a place of safety. Tell me about it." Aaron scoffs quietly to himself that he was never one for church, never one to bare his soul to anyone, unless he was mildly drunk, and he didn't even know this man. But suddenly he began to speak to this stranger. It was almost as if he couldn't stop himself, and all the things that he was keeping inside came tumbling out at once. He told him about Afghanistan, about the day that they were ambushed and his squad pushed into the nearby courtyard, that a kid had stepped out in front of him without warning and he fired without thinking, believing it to be an enemy combatant who was stepping forward to try and kill him and his fellow soldiers. He had been holding that inside for some time, with the events replaying in his mind almost every single night. "It's more than that. It's like I'm reliving the events more vividly since coming to town," he whispered, and the pastor just nods sagely. "They say the air of Silverton has strange effects on people," he whispers. Aaron nods, unable to stop himself from continuing. He goes on explaining that his father had died while he was deployed, that it happened quickly and he wasn't able to say goodbye or go to the funeral. He didn't come home right away, leaving his mother and his sister to grieve on their own, and tears begin to fall from his eyes as he explains that he pushed them away, that his sister ended up leaving so that she could find herself. "She came here, looking for some sort of answers," he says, and then there's a brief pause as Aaron sucks in his breath, and he hears the pastor's voice. "I think I met your sister." Aaron looks up slightly shocked. "She came here a few days ago, told me a story very similar to what you're saying." Whatever strange hold had taken Aaron disappears almost immediately as he stands, his eyes already drying. "Where did she go? Is she still here?" The pastor smiles sagely. "I gave her some advice and showed her something of the truth. After that, she prepared for her journey," he says cryptically. Aaron doesn't understand, but the pastor motions him forward and turns to go. After a moment's hesitation, Aaron decides to follow, comforted by the pistol that is still tucked in his belt. The pastor continues to speak as he leads him forward, bringing him to what Aaron assumed was a closet, but it turns out stairs leading down into a basement. Many of the lost come to find their path in Silverton. The silver lining is what the tourist propaganda calls it. But that's all just trite to bring in the gullible. Most people don't really know what lies beneath the town, sleeping quietly until the day that it will eventually rise. Aaron is holding back, not fully trusting the man. Whatever hold had taken him upstairs had disappeared, replaced once again with the caution that had been drilled into him by the military. But he had to keep moving forward, believing that if Candace had spoken to the strange man of God last, she might be in trouble. They reached the bottom step, and the hallway opened up into an expansive room. Aaron was right to be cautious, as the room had a feel of a murder basement out of some slasher flick. The center of the room was made up of a deep pit, and Aaron paused as a warm gust of air blew up from that pit. The pastor kept moving forward, still rambling about some vaguely ominous-sounding religious rhetoric. But Aaron's eyes were drawn up and he saw her. Across the room, Candace sat in a large cage. He rushed across the room as she sat up quickly, her eyes widening in shock as she saw him. "Oh, thank God!" she gasps as he gets closer. He reaches for the bars, his eyes quickly looking at the large padlock. He glances over to the cage next to her, trying to ignore the smell of old blood that hangs in the air, the dried blood that is crusted on the floor and the bars of the cages. "Don't trust him! He's crazy!" she whispers to him, and Aaron suddenly whirls around to see the pastor moving towards him. He is now wearing a very serious expression on his face and a knife glinting in his hand. "You both keep your guilt buried so deep, it controls so much of your life," he tells them, and Aaron turns, putting his back to the cage as his hand drifts to the small of his own back. The building suddenly begins to shake, loose dirt falling from the walls, and for a brief moment he thinks he hears a strange noise echoing from the pit. "But you need not keep it locked away, for it is the guilt that feeds the eternal one below. You may relinquish yourself to him. Allow him to take you to all that haunts you. Allow him to rise into this world," he says, his voice growing higher and louder as he speaks. The room is shaking again, stronger this time. "He's crazy. He's been coming down and preaching this garbage to me for the last couple of days," Candace snaps to her brother. Aaron has had enough. He draws the gun, the soldier in him taking over. "Okay, I've had enough of this perverse Sunday school lesson," he says as he raises the weapon, aiming it at the man. He moves away from the cages, keeping the pastor in front of him as he circles away. "Unlock the cage, let her out," he orders. To his surprise, the pastor drops the knife to the ground and holds up his hands. The room continues to rumble and shake. "Of course, there isn't anything you can do to stop the birth now," he says, moving towards the cage, pulling a key out of his pocket. He holds up a finger, pointing upwards to the shaking ceiling. "Do you feel that? That is our Lord coming forth. He will usher this world into the void of darkness, feeding off the guilt of those around him," he says with a smile to Candace. As the cage door swings open, she pushes past him, keeping her distance. She rushes to her brother, but Aaron doesn't waste time, motioning towards the stairs and urging her forward. "Go, go," he shouts, glancing down for an instant at the pit nearby. Candace runs forward, her dirty sneakers clumping up on the wooden stairs. When he couldn't hear her running anymore, he then begins to back up, making sure the pistol is still aimed at the preacher. He felt the stairs hit his heel, and he turned to run, rushing up the wooden stairs as the shaking grew louder and more uncontrollable. He rushed back into the sanctuary, finding Candace waiting for him. She tries to speak, but he shakes his head and grabs her by the arm, practically dragging her towards the front doors. He glances at the windows as they pass. But instead of a bright, clear morning, the world outside the glass is nothing but darkness, a black void swirling past them, lightning cracking in the distance and lighting up the world of dark storms. "What the hell is this?" he whispers as they both stop, awestruck by the world around them. Suddenly, running steps can be heard on the stairs of the basement. Aaron turns, pushing his sister behind him as he raises the pistol again. The pastor isn't armed. He holds at his arms as he slowly walks past them. "Do you not see? He has already risen. He has brought this world into darkness. The end is upon us," he bellows, but the shaking suddenly stops. Aaron and Candace look at the church around them, both sensing that something was drawing near. The double doors of the entrance of the church suddenly explode inward. Aaron whirls, the gun coming up. The massive hulk of a monster ducks underneath the arch of the double doors, and he enters the church, standing at his full height. Aaron's eyes widen in fear as he takes in the mass of human flesh, a beast standing 7 feet tall with a scarred and bleeding bearskin draped over its shoulders, pulling his face into the shadows. Barbed wire and chains crisscross his body, and in his hands is a massive cleaver. Aaron is briefly aware of his sister's terrified screams, and for a moment he finds himself frozen in place. But as the monster begins to stomp forward, he pushes her back. They move between the pews, keeping their backs to the wall as they see both the pastor and this new horror. He still tries to block Candace, though he doesn't know if it'll be any good. The pastor is still praising whatever darkness he calls God, now babbling in some indecipherable language. But as Aaron aims the pistol at the monster, he realizes that it isn't coming for them. It practically ignores both of them as it stomps forward with a purpose, its footsteps shaking and cracking the old wooden floor as it moves. The pastor finally opens his eyes as the monster nears him, his look of ecstasy becoming a look of terror as the monster reaches out, grabbing him by the throat. "What? No! I've done his works! I'm his chosen follower!" He gasps, choking. The bear man regards him with no emotion. No words escape his lips from the shadows. The monster raises the holy man off of his feet, and he turns to walk back towards the door. Aaron still hasn't lowered his weapon, but watches as the bear man stops for a moment. The pastor continuing to struggle and plead, but the monster cares not. He turns regarding the cowering man and woman, and for a moment Aaron prepares to fire. But the monster turns and continues to walk, striding out of the church once more, ducking under the eaves to drag the infernal preacher out into the swirling darkness of the void. As if on cue, once the monster steps out of the door, the darkness retreats. Candace begins to blink as it seems like someone flipped a switch and light has returned to the world. The swirling storm has disappeared, replaced by the sound of mourning birds singing their songs. She sat still for a moment, looking around confused, and then she called out to her brother. "Aaron?" But he wasn't sitting next to her where he just was. She looked around the church, checked between the pews, but Aaron was missing. She began to panic as she burst out of the front door of the church, seeing the bright morning sky. She didn't see a bear man, she didn't see the preacher, and she didn't see Aaron. The only thing that she saw was a sign near the entrance of Silverton, a sign that would indicate that you're leaving, a sign that read, "Hope you found your silver lining."